So I am going to talk about two abessive postpositions or caritive postpositions in Hungarian, and I will discuss their semantic and syntactic definitions. So I defined a caritive or abessive case for myself as follows. It marks an NP whose referent affects the situation described in the sentence by its absence. So there are two such postpositions in Hungarian, Nélkül, which means without, and hiány, which means for lack of. Now they differ with respect to their meaning. Nélkül expresses non-participation or non-use or non-existence, whereas hiány expresses non-existence only, and furthermore, it elicits the definiteness effect, the definiteness restriction on its complement. And syntactically, both are so-called case-like postpositions, which take a small clause complement, and the hiány PP is a high adverbial, whereas the without PP is a low adverbial. So this is what I'm going to argue. So here is a minimal pair illustrating the semantic difference of the two postpositions. Tehát webse adatközlők nélkül, without web's consultants, it's not possible to write a web's grammar. This was 1A, and in 1B, for lack of web's consultants, it's not possible to write a web's grammar. So without web's consultants, here without means non-participation. So this without web's consultants is a minus commutative. Whereas in 1B, for lack of web's consultants, this for lack of means non-existence. And this expression, this hiány PP functions as an adverbial of cause. Here is another minimal pair, 2A, without sugar, bitter, I drink coffee. And 2B, for lack of sugar, I drink coffee bitter. So without sugar means non-participation. In this case, it's a minus instrumental. Whether 2B means non-existence, and again, it's an adverbial of cause. So for lack of sugar, I drink coffee bitter. Now, actually, Nélkül, without, can also express non-existence. So I have some examples here. János, I read the sentences out in English. John delivered his speech without any mistakes, or it poured, the rain poured without intermission, or the suspect disappeared without trace, without any trace. But even in these cases, it would be impossible to replace Nélkül without with hiány for lack of, just observe. John delivered his speech for lack of any mistake, or the rain poured for lack of any intermission. The suspect disappeared for lack of any trace. These are word salads because the functions these PPs fulfill are different. So the Nélkül PP, the without PP, is a low adverbial, which has scope over the predicate phrase. So Hungarian sentences have a topic comment or topic predicate structure, and this Nélkül PP has a scope over the predicate phrase, whereas the hiány PP, for lack of PP, has maximal scope. So here I have a sentence which contains negation and the possibility modal and the PP. And in the case of the without, this PP is within the scope of both operators. So we cannot solve the task without any help, segítség nélkül, without any help. If I paraphrase it, it's clear that it has narrow scope. It is not possible for us to solve the task without any help. Hiány PP, on the other hand, is outside the scope of these operators. For lack of help, it is not possible for us to solve the task. And here is another minimal pair. I downloaded one of them from the internet. And this illustrates that the Nélkül PP can have a generic interpretation, so 6, without intense profiling. There is no true representation of the human character. Sounds like a generic statement. Whereas if we replace the without PP with a he and PP, then it will become an existential statement anchored to a particular situation, an episodic sentence. So for lack of intense profiling, or there being no intense profiling, no true representation of the human character is attested. So now let's look at the syntax of these postpositions. Well, the first question that arises is whether hian is a postposition at all. Well, it looks like a postposition. Hungarian postpositions practically all involve a nominal stem supplied with a possessive ending and a case marker, and either the stem or the case marker or both are obsolete. So hian includes the stem void, which is more or less obsolete, but it still exists in words like foghi, which means tooth gap. And there is the possessive suffix and the superessive case ending. And it's neither a noun nor a verb, but it takes an NP complement, and it's adjacent to its complement, for example, for lack of result, eredmény hiány. Now, Hungarian P's postpositions come in two varieties. There are case-like and case-assigning postpositions. So case-like postpositions take a bare NP complement. If they take a pronominal complement, they bear possessive ending or personal ending. And if they take a complement with a demonstrative, they are repeated both after the demonstrative and the noun phrase, so they are doubled. So like after, ferry after, me, I after agreement, and this after the day after. Case assigning postpositions take a case marked complement like very well együtt with very together. And when they take a pronominal complement, the agreement suffix appears on the case ending. This case ending also used to be a postposition, but now it's cliticized to lexical nouns. Tehát én velem, I with agreement together. And it's not doubled if the complement has a demonstrative. Now, hian looks like a case-like postposition because it takes a bare complement, Péter. So it's like után, this typical case-like P. Look at the right-hand side column, pénz hian, a bare complement, money for lack of. Now, however, it cannot take a possessive agreement, and it cannot be doubled after a demonstrative. However, I will argue that, in fact, it is a proper case-like postposition. It never bears agreement or it's never doubled because it cannot take either a pronominal complement or a DP complement with a demonstrative. More generally, it cannot take a definite or a specific indefinite complement. It is a definiteness effect postposition. It imposes a definiteness restriction on its complement. Why? Because here, the stem is an existential predicate of a small clause. So this is the structure I assigned to he and PPs. So the postposition, in fact, is the adverbial case marking N, the superessive case. Now it takes a possessive construction, which is analyzed, for example, by Marcel and Dicken as a small clause. The possessor is experience in this case. The possessum is lack. And so the linker, which links the two into a small clause, is the possessive suffix. So this means experience lack of, for lack of experience. Now, so this is the underlying structure, but this possessive suffix and the superessive are bound morphemes. So first, this he and p incorporates into the possessive suffix, and then this hia incorporates into the superlative suffix. So for the intuition, the expression is segmented, as you see in the last line, tapasztalat hiány, experience for lack of. Now, so this he, this predicate in this possessive small clause is an existential predicate, a negative existential predicate. It means void, non-existence. Now, so I will claim that it's a definiteness effect predicate. So what is the definiteness effect? Well, it was first discussed in the 70s. It was observed that a predicate like there is, there are, only allows a non-specific indefinite subject, like there is a picture, there are some pictures, there are two pictures, that's fine. But a definite or specific indefinite subject is impossible. There is the picture, there is every picture, or Mary, there is Mary's picture, these are all out. And the most convincing explanation of this fact was proposed by Barwise and Cooper in 1981. They argued that there is a logical predicate of existence, predicating the existence of its subject. Now, a definite or a specific indefinite subject has a presupposed referent, and predicating the existence of an individual that is presupposed to exist is either a tautology, or in the case of negated existential sentences, a contradiction. And these are not tolerated by human languages. Now, Anna Szabolcsy extended this theory by claiming that the definiteness effect is elicited by all predicates, all verbs, which have an exist meaning component. So all verbs of coming into being and all verbs of creation, which basically mean cause to come into being. And so in Hungarian, it's easy to see because these verbs coming into being and creation verbs come in two versions. They come without a perfectivizing prefix and with a prefix. Now, it's the version without the prefix, which is a true verb of coming into being or true verb of creation. The one with a prefix expresses a change of state. So look at 12, gyerek született, a baby was born. It's absolutely ungrammatical to say a gyerek született, minden gyerek született, the child was born, every child was born. Of course, there is the verb megszületett, a particle verb, and this can only be used if there is already a presupposed child and we want to say that it has come to light. Or in a few minutes, I cooked a soup. I cannot say I cooked the soup. In a few minutes, I cooked the soup. Sharply ungrammatical. However, there is a change of state verb, megfőz, to prefix cook, which means to change the state of the soup, and this is not a definiteness effect verb anymore. So crucially, so these definiteness effects verbs allow and exclude the same type of complements, internal arguments, as the hiány postposition. So I cannot say the guest is, every guest is, Peter's guest is, and we cannot say the guest for lack of, Peter's guest for lack of, and so on and so forth. But we can say there is a guest, there are guests, and we can say guests for lack of guests, plural. So I argue that the hiány elicits this definiteness effect because there is this negative existential predicate in the internal structure of the hiány PP. Now, what about the without postposition, the without PP? Well, without looks at first sight like a case-like postposition. So Péter nélkül, without Peter, Peter is not case-marked, and it can bear possessive agreement. I without én nélkülem, you without te nélküled. However, it has, look at the right-hand side column, it also has a different paradigm, a case marking paradigm in nálam nélkül. Here, I, the personal pronoun, is supplied with a adessive suffix, and the possessive agreement is attached to this adessive, that in nálam nélkül, te, you, adessive agreement without. So how come, what's going on here? Well, originally, in Old Hungarian, we have the following version of these postpositional phrases. Look at the bottom of the page. Péter Nélkül. Peter adessive, Nél is the adessive case, and kül means out. So kül was the original postposition, and then this expression came to be segmented differently. Nél was incorporated by the postposition, and then Peter Peter remained bare. Now, so let's look at the internal structure of Nélkül PPs. Nélkül PPs taking a personal pronoun complement, and Nélkül PPs taking a lexical complement. So first 19a, when Nélkül takes a personal pronoun complement, here the possessor, the subject of this possessive small clause is I. The predicate, the possessum, is this nál, this adessive case ending, which means at now, but originally, so earlier, now it's a case ending. Earlier it was a postposition, and it's a uralic noun, which used to mean something like presence or nearness, something like this. So this originally meant my presence out, something like this. And then this nál incorporated into kül, but in this fossilized construction, it can also be spelled out twice. It can also be spelled out in the position, in its original position. So it can be doubled. Nél is undergoes a vowel harmony. Now, if the possessor or the complement is a lexical noun phrase, then this doubling is not possible anymore. Nél is obligatorily incorporated into the postposition. And so I assume, in fact, I follow Dékány and Dickon, who studied abessive case in Estonian and also the without postposition in English, and they argued that, in fact, without takes a small clause complement also in English, which is clear, for example, in the so-called absolute construction, that without Peter at home, we can't solve the problem. Or without a GPS on my windscreen, I won't go anywhere. And so it can be absent. So if the construction is not an absolute construction, then this NP is empty. It's not absent, it's empty. And that's why the interpretation of without PP is more flexible, because it's sort of implicit and we can attribute it to the meaning of absence, or that non-presence, non-use, non-participation, or non-existence. Now, when that nélkül can also mean non-existence, and in this case, it is also a definiteness effect postposition. So look at 20. The students without mistake solve the task, or 20b. The new colleague without experiences set to work. So here, yeah, nélkül takes a bare NP complement. Now, what about the external syntax of hiány and nélkül? So hiány, it's a high adverbial, a contingency adverbial, an adverbial of cause. So it appears in the topic domain. It either precedes the topic or follows the topic, but it precedes the comment whose left edge is marked by the main stress. So it precedes the main stress. For lack of help, the children didn't manage, or the children, for lack of help, didn't manage. Now, Nélkül, on the other hand, on the contrary, is a low thematic adjunct, a minus commutative or minus instrumental, and it's part of the predicate phrase. So look at 22, the children didn't manage without help. So it's either post-verbal inside the VP, or it can be focused, or it can only be a contrastive topic with a special intonation. So segítség nélkül, without any help, the children didn't manage. And finally, just let me mention a very interesting and particular use of the he and PP, which is also a kind of an abessive use. So we can use it with expressions meaning a degree or a quantity, and the he and PP expresses the amount which is missing from the given degree or amount. It's very difficult to translate these sentences into English. I was struggling with them. So 23A, the hotel, tehát 2 szoba híján tele, which means 2 rooms híján full. So the hotel is full, 2 rooms less. So the hotel is full except for 2 rooms. Or a very common expression, 1 híján 100, 1 less 100. There were 100 guests less 1, so basically 99 guests at the wedding party. Or John, little or by a hair, missed the train, kis híján, little híján, or hair híján. So to summarize, I argued that the semantic space of abessive or caritive case is covered by 2 postpositions in Hungarian, by he and PPs and by Nélkül PPs. So he and PPs are high contingency adverbials or cause adverbials of cause, and they express, the híján expresses the non-existence of its complement, and as a predicate of existence, it elicits the definiteness effect. And Nélkül PPs are low adverbials, or in other terminologies, thematic adjuncts or participant PPs. And Nélkül can express the non-participation or non-existence, non-use of its complement. And it elicits the definiteness effect only under the non-existence interpretation. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we have enough time for the discussion. And the first question is from Mehmet. Mehmet, do you want to ask it or I read it?
Can this postposition be used with nominalizations?
Nominalizations? Tanulás nélkül tanulás. Yes, I think so. Yes, with the gerund-like expressions.
Both postpositions.
Yes, yes.
Thanks.
Maxim also has questions.
Yes, thank you so much. I had actually, first I had a question about, is there an overlap between the two in these reason uses? So normally, well, not normally, but in some languages like English, the broad caritive adposition is normally also used in this context, right? Like English without or Russian без. So is it the case that in Hungarian, the more general one is absolutely excluded from this context?
So let me check. I had examples like, for lack of consultants, we cannot solve, we cannot write a grammar, sorry. And yes, it can be used, but the meaning will not be exactly identical. But yeah, there is, yeah, it can be. So there is a one-way overlap. So Hian can be replaced with without, but without cannot be replaced by Hian. Yeah.
But I think that those examples about the grammars were actually, I mean, they were having some semantic contrast. And in the case of without, the Hungarian equivalent of without, we had only this probably some conditional interpretation. But
So
is it possible with reason, purely reason interpretation?
Yes. So I couldn't perfectly hear you.
Oh, okay.
Which are we talking about?
I think the examples about verbs.
Verbs. Oh yeah, it's here.
The sad examples.
Again. So yeah. So yeah, I think 1A has a general meaning, so it can also be used in the situation described by 1B. So it allows the interpretation that there are no, so we are without webs consultants because they don't exist anymore. It allows, but yeah. So yes, you are right. So it can cover the situation described by 1B, but the situation by 1B
is not coverable.
So I had these examples here here. So John delivered his speech for lack of any mistake. So in this, oh, sorry, I don't know what happened. So anyway, yes, you are right. So there is some overlap between them.
Okay, thank you. I just thought that probably I should think more about some context where these two interpretations would be mutually exclusive, so that we could test if, well, probably if we find some, because in the Votic one, in verbs one, I think we still have the possibility of conditional interpretation, even in the situation when we know that all the speakers are not alive. So thank you. I'll think about it more. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what without PPs do not allow this high adverbial cause interpretation. So these sentences would be out without. Yeah. So this Nélkül here, when this Nélkül is a low adverbial, it cannot be substituted by Hian.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now, please, Ora Matusansky.
Yeah, very interesting, lovely talk. I also even, yeah. So I wanted to ask two questions. One is sort of related to the previous question about the possibility of intersection. I'm not sure.
We can't hear you.
Hello?
I do hear you.
Yeah, okay, good. So my first question was, you are treating the more limited preposition or element as a possessive phrase,
Yes.
which is combined with a preposition. But do you know, I mean, you're the speaker and you know the history of the language. I was wondering whether why this is not experience lacking, as in lack being the predicate of the predication, well, of the small clause, and experience being the subject. And the reason why I'm asking this is because the reason interpretation may come from an independent factor. I think it was Stump who described this, that if you have something like a participial gerundive small clause with an individual level predicate, then you get a circumstantial interpretation. But if you have, the stage level predicate, you get circumstantial interpretation. And if you have individual level predicate, you get reason interpretation, like as in having long arms, he can reach the ceiling. And lack in this situation would be, in fact, an individual level predicate. And so the reason interpretation would come from an independent factor, not from the suppressive preposition, but rather from just the fact of this being a high level small clause. So that was my first question.
Yeah, well, so this can be replaced by a small clause like there being no experience. But so I couldn't, I'm not sure I understood the question. So he is definitely a noun, and this is definitely a possessive construction. But I agree with your comment, but this happens to be a possessive construction, and he is definitely a noun.
And then I'm guessing my second comment would be something like, I guess the reason why you have this reason interpretation for without, if it is, I don't know how you're treating this, but because you didn't do a possessive construction in this situation, right? I was basically wondering if this reason interpretation could not be derived from the same factors.
So I absolutely agree with you. And so I think the important thing is that there is a small clause here. So in fact, my intuition would be to translate these sentences. So for example, for lack of WebS consultants, we couldn't write the grammar by translating there being no WebS consultants. So this is, but in Hungarian, this is a nominal predicate, and there is no verb in Hungarian sentences with a nominal predicate. So perhaps that's why we don't see here a participial phrase.
I might be missing something. I mean, I was, my understanding, maybe we're talking about something different when we say small clause. I think that a small clause is something that consists of a subject and a predicate. And the result is a clause, like a predication. So if this were something like experience lacking.
Yes,
right?
I see. Yeah, I am sorry, I am following the story or the theory of Marsden Dickens. It's his idea that a possessive expression is a small clause. And it's sort of, I wasn't sure I believed him, but in this case, it's so obvious. So he claims that in a predication structure, the subject, commands the predicate, and there is a linker. And this linker, which, so one is the specifier, the other one is the complement of a head, and this structural relation yields the small clause. And here the possessive ending would be this linker. So this is Marsden Dickens' theory, actually.
Okay. I'm just confused because whenever I hear small clause, I think predication, that is truth conditions, right? And what you seem to be describing is a referent, right? Like, the lack of experience.
Yes.
Right. So that's what confused me so much.
Well, experience is lacking. Experience is absent. Tulajdonképpen, yeah, it's equivalent to that, because you can interpret this as a nominal predicate. This lack.
Okay.
There is a short question in the chat by Adam. Adam?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My question is whether, I know that Nélkül is like other postpositions in that it can be adjectivalized. I believe that's the word. Is the same possible with híján?
Yeah, it cannot. Yeah, it's
Okay.
a good question. Yeah.
Can you do that alternative strategy that the way that the case endings in the language have to be combined with valo or leve when you use them pre-nominally? Could you do that with hian?
So I can't, but probably the reason is that it's a high adverbial and adverbial of course, so it can never modify a noun phrase, only a proposition.
Okay, thank you very much. That was my question.
Thank you.
Maxim, I'm very sorry. I think we do not have enough time for a follow-up discussion. Could you be very quick, or could we omit?
I wrote everything in the chat, so I think I just came up with an example which can tell apart these two interpretations I was speaking about. So if Katalin can answer if it's possible to use in this context. Both
so
of them.
Yes, without his brother. So here, if it's a specific noun phrase, so we cannot use here hian, because it never occurs with a specific noun phrase, a definite one.
Okay, without help, he couldn't finish the house.
That would be
he wasn't able.
Both in, it could be both hian and without, but hian would imply that there is, so it's non-existent. Whereas without can mean that he didn't use it. Probably it was available, but he didn't use it.
I see. Okay, thank you.